The Cricket Song One Winter Night. A short story by Tan Tien Zhuang. A recording done by Kim Vu. One night I suddenly woke up, perhaps about past midnight. While lying in a half asleep, half awake state, I suddenly heard the faint sound of a cricket chirping somewhere. The chirping sound sometimes seemed distant and vague in the subconscious of the past, and sometimes it seemed real, right by the porch next to the bedroom. At first I didn't pay much attention to the sound and tried to find ways to continue sleeping. Since the day I entered the stage of 70 years old, I have greatly valued sleep, because as everyone knows, it is difficult to sleep as you get old. When I can't sleep at night, the next day my body is exhausted. I don't want to do anything all day, including going through the routine, and also the hobby, of walking every morning in the park near my house. Many nights when I couldn't sleep, I had to take sleeping pills, but my doctor advised me not to abuse them because I would face many harmful effects later. Usually, older people only sleep about 4 hours a night, then to kill time they get up, make tea or coffee, sit and sip and reflect on life, what happened yesterday and the day before yesterday. Then last month, last year, maybe even half a century ago. For writers like me, we often think about a short plot or the layout of a long story. But thinking is one thing, and expressing it in words on a page is another. Because thinking and writing is a long, difficult and tiring process. Especially when you have to wait for the inspiration to come so you can write. But for older people, inspiration is rare indeed. Luckily, I live alone, so if I want to get up, lie down or do anything, I am completely independent and free. But there are many old friends who live with their wives and children and have many limits. Now back to my neighbor the cricket. I don't know when he came here. Did he temporarily settle down or stay infinitely? Did he choose this place as his home like me, or was it just a stop on his journey of adventure? I lay there for a long time, unable to go back to sleep, so I opened my eyes, still lying quietly in bed, looking out at the night sky. I have a habit of not closing the window curtains when sleeping. It was the middle of winter now. The weather outside was very cold. Looking out through the corner of the window, I saw a few distant stars twinkling in the dark sky. Was it because of my stirring or my sighing that the cricket suddenly stopped chirping? Or have you gone to sleep? I guess he was also an old guy, so at night he couldn't sleep and he chirped to relieve his sadness. Scientists say that the reason a cricket rubs its wings together to make a chirping sound is to flirt and solicit a female cricket to come to him for love. I think differently. I think this cricket was awake in the middle of the night, feeling that the world was so sad, so he wanted to sing to help cheer up life. Imagine how sad our lives would be without the lyrics and songs of singers. While I was dreaming and about to fall asleep again, my cricket singer chirped again. This time, I don't understand why I listen to the cricket's song now and it was so terribly sad. The sound was like a complaint. Perhaps he lamented the endlessly long night? Time and again, it resounded, a sad slow beat, languidly and mournfully. He chirped for a while and then rested. Rested for a while then chirped again. Could it be that there were no female crickets around so he continued to be lonely and forgetful in his singing? I was engrossed in listening to the cricket's sad song until dawn came without even realizing it. When the sound of engines started noisily from the street, my cricket stopped chirping completely. Maybe he didn't want his singing to mix with the motley sounds of life. That morning was rather abnormal. Even though I couldn't get a full night's sleep, I didn't feel as tired as usual. After breakfast, I sat down at the writing desk with a feeling of refreshment and relief. Thank you, cricket. Thank you, my new neighbor. Hopefully tonight I can hear your chirping again. In the evening, I didn't watch TV as usual, because I was afraid that if I made too much noise I wouldn't be able to hear the crickets chirping. While waiting for the late night singing, suddenly the old years of my childhood came rushing back without me knowing it. That year I was 8 or 9 years old. I come from a rich family in a small city on the Vietnamese-Chinese border, so I have many friends from all backgrounds. I attended all the games, especially the cricket game. Because I'm from a rich family, I'm very shy and lazy. At night, I didn't dare follow my friends of the same age to go catching crickets. I waited until the next morning to see if there was a boy who had caught a big, beautiful cricket with a big neck that seemed like a good fighter. I would immediately offer to buy it from him. Therefore my cricket regularly holds a championship title in the town. I have a friend named Mon, who comes from a poor family but has high pride and is very eager to win. He was always on the lookout to take over my cricket championship. Whenever he caught a big cricket, he'd bring it to me to challenge. One time, perhaps in my whole life I will hardly forget it. It was a citywide cricket competition for our kids. It is only held once a year in the summer. The award is not of great value, but it is an opportunity for us to show off to the whole class and the whole school. I spent a lot of money collecting crickets. In my possession, I have more than 10 crickets of different types, from coal crickets to fire crickets, each one majestic and chirping loudly. Seems like I've had the cricket championship firmly in my hands. My opponent was also not of the average type. He hunted for crickets day and night and dared to risk going to the other side of the river at night to catch them. The reason I said he dared to risk going to the other side of the river was because people said there were a lot of crickets there, but there were also a lot of ghosts, so none of us kids dared to go near. All day and night, crickets were freely chirping throughout the whole area. Mon announced to everyone that this year he was determined to take back my cricket championship. The match promised to be thrilling. And among our friends, we were divided into two factions. One side bet my cricket would win. The other bet my cricket would lose. The prize was a treat of sweet candy pulled by Mr. Ba Tao at the end of the street. It was cricket fighting day. Of course, in the final match, there were only my cricket and Mon's left. Before going into the match, to create momentum, Mon and I took a young twig of May grass and rotated it in front of the cricket so that the cricket would get excited and make a threatening sound. Then, in the presence of nearly 10 children, including boys and girls, the two crickets were released into a large paper box. In just a split second, they rushed forward and fought. The battle lasted several minutes and was extremely fierce amid the applause and cheers from both sides. While my cricket was aggressively biting and pushing Mon's cricket back and was on the way to victory, Mon suddenly put his hand into the paper box, quickly grabbed my cricket and crushed it to death. To everyone's surprise, Mon took the paper box and his cricket and ran away after declaring that his cricket had won the match. From then on, I was angry at Mon and stopped playing with him. In 1945, my family moved back to Hanoi to live. I no longer had the opportunity to meet my cricket fighting friends again, especially Mon, my eager to win opponent. And it was only decades later that I heard about him. That was after April 30th, 1975, when I was arrested and imprisoned on the charge of anti-communism at the superstructure. In the cell, there was an elderly soldier with the rank of lieutenant colonel, arrested and locked up for corruption. During our conversation, he accidentally told me the news that my childhood cricket friend Mon had become a communist major general, currently the commander of Division 10, stationed right in the area where I was re-educated. If I meet Mon again now and continue playing the cricket game, I think, even if my cricket wins, Mon will still strangle it to death and he will still calmly declare victory as usual. I was so engrossed in returning to the past that I forgot when my cricket singer started chirping again. Tonight the sky was also dark and cold. Occasionally an eastern breeze moved the branches and leaves in the corner of the garden and the rain fell intermittently, making the already sad world even sadder. I didn't know what else to do, so I looked at the sky and the ground, sighed and then started listening to the cricket chirp. Lying alone in a quiet room on a cold winter night, listening to the sound of the cricket lamenting made me feel even sadder. My thoughts seemed to be immersed in the sound of the cricket chirping. I counted each beat, each time to see if the cricket chirped systematically or if he just chirped on impulse, according to instinct. The cricket sang for a moment and then fell silent. Perhaps because it was raining so water had flooded his cave, causing him to get his wings wet and cold, so he had to keep quiet? It was also a cold, rainy winter night like tonight at a re-education camp in the Central Highlands, when it was time to go to bed. After the alarm had gone off for a while, I was about to cover my head with a blanket when I heard the voice of a fellow prisoner lying next to me exclaiming, "Ah, a big cricket." I sat up just as my friend caught the cricket, a big, fat black charcoal cricket, with a beautiful shiny head and wings. The two whiskers on both sides of the head curled up arrogantly. My friend said, "And now I'll have some nutrition tomorrow morning." What he said meant that tomorrow morning the cricket would be grilled and eaten. I asked him to give it to me. My friend firmly refused. In the end, I had to negotiate an exchange of 3 cigarettes before he agreed. I took a matchbox, punched a small hole, put the cricket in it and put it in the outer pocket of my backpack made of burlap. That night the cricket kept wiggling around in the matchbox and never made a sound. Perhaps it was the first time in his life that he was locked in a cage and lost his freedom. At noon the next day, while everyone was just napping and trying to take advantage of their short rest, my cricket suddenly started chirping repeatedly. Startling everyone awake. The whole room seemed very uncomfortable. Some people cursed and threatened. I knew what my cricket's fate would be. I tried not to leave it. And I decided that after a few days of playing with him to relieve my sadness, I would release him to a small garden growing peanuts so that he would have less difficulty in making a living. Crickets love to eat peanuts. When I went to work, I kept it in my pocket. Occasionally, while I hoed the ground, it would make a loud chirping sound, making me temporarily forget the fatigue and hardship of working on a large chunk of rock-hard soil. Then one day, after the morning alarm, I woke up and didn't hear the cricket's usual chirping sound to greet the dawn. I immediately opened the small bag in my backpack and took out the matchbox containing the cricket. The matchbox was crushed. The cricket was crushed, its intestines exposed. A few ants had come looking for a share. I knew the culprit was my neighbor, the person who exchanged the cricket for 3 cigarettes. He slaughtered it because it chirped so he couldn't sleep. After being released from prison, I was with my grandson who was 6 years old and also loved crickets. All day long he carried the cricket box, made of a pretty wooden box, not a matchbox like we used to have, and went out to the street to gather the children for cricket fights. His parents tried to stop him from playing this barbaric and brutal game, as his mother often said. The boy strongly objected. The matter was brought me for judgment. How can I judge when this grandson is my own image, my past from decades ago? One day I was reading the newspaper when my grandson came home from school. Before he could put his school bag away, he walked over to me and cried, "Grandpa, my friend has strangled my cricket to death." He opened the lid of the wooden box for me to see. The corpse of a fire cricket lay on its back with its intestines exposed. I asked, "Did your cricket-fighting friend strangle it to death?" The little boy nodded. After my cricket rolled his cricket around and made the victory cry, my friend got angry and strangled it to death. Is he the principal's child or grandchild? I asked. The nephew nodded. The incident from decades ago happened again. While my grandson was begging me for money to buy another cricket, his father came home from work, heard about it, and said, "Okay, from now on, no more crickets. That's it. All day long, you only eat and play with crickets and don't study. Grandpa, from now on, stop giving him money." I saw my grandson's eyes filled with tears. I winked at him, signaling that I would give him money later. The boy's face brightened up. Before going into the room to change clothes, he said, "Honest, Grandpa." Now more than 10 years have passed. My grandson was no longer a little boy who loved to play with crickets all day long. He was a freshman in college. Occasionally I'd phone back to Vietnam to chat with my children and grandchildren. Many times I had wanted to ask my grandson if he still played with crickets, but I always forgot. My neighbor cricket continued to sing as the days passed. Time goes by every day and night in the 24-hour rotation, and I don't understand why for an old person like me, time passes so quickly. Just an instance, And it's already the end of a day, the end of a month, the end of a year. Due to the impact of a big storm in the middle of winter this year, the tail of the storm fell on the area where I live. Late at night, amidst the howling sound of the storm, I still occasionally heard my cricket chirp, but the sound was no longer as bustling and long-winded as before. Perhaps you are as tired of time as I am? Or is it because trying to sing as hard as you can doesn't get you anywhere? Life still replays the game of making crickets fight and suffocating them to death, over and over again? The remaining days of this winter will probably be very sad, and the winter nights will also be very long. Maybe my cricket has gone somewhere else. I don't believe he suddenly passed away. In America, there are no children hunting for crickets, making crickets fight, or killing crickets. Perhaps he left because he thought the storm would continue. All I know is that for several nights without my friends chirping, I couldn't sleep, and from midnight to morning I kept thinking about him. And I have never felt so empty in my heart, my dear cricket. Unexpectedly, a day or two later, in the middle of the night, while I was lying in bed, thinking idly and not expecting the chirping of my neighbor cricket, the chirping started again. At first I thought it was the sound of crickets chirping in my subconscious. But no, it was really the chirping sound of my neighbor little brother. His sound was not as clear as before, but still echoed in the deep, dark night. That's how I know that storms and rain don't make him scared or silent. I think he'll continue to sing on winter nights like this to entertain people like me who can't sleep. And I believe he will continue to sing until he is old and exhausted. Hearing him sing, I am as happy as seeing an old friend coming to visit after a long time. Thank you, cricket. Please stay here with me always. I'm cold and lonely. Your singing warms my heart. At the same time, your singing also makes me feel wistful and sad, thinking about my old friends who write poetry. Each of them is 70 or 80 years old now, but they still forget their age, forget the cruel ravages of time, and still wrestle with poetry all year round.